Hello everybody, my name is Ratnos, and today I wanted to make a quick video talking about the new Ian Hazzikostas interview and the community council that has been announced. So let's start with the Ian Hazzikostas interview. You can read this whole thing. I'll put a link in the description below. A lot of the stuff at the top is about the diversity changes at Blizzard and going around and tinkering with some of the old jokes in the game from 15 years ago. Kind of outside the scope of this video. I will say I actually don't mind most of those things. I know that's going to be a opinion that's got a lot of you clicking the dislike button and leaving already, but I really don't think it's that bad to change some of those jokes that don't really work that well in today's age and feel a little weird. Also, I don't know, man. It seems like such a small thing and such a something that really just is unimportant for how I play the game. So I'm just not going to be one of the people up in arms about it. It's just not happening. So let's talk though about the future of World of Warcraft section here, because this is a lot of stuff about the systems that are worth talking about. So first thing is about, do you think there's something in the feedback loop Blizzard can improve because all the changes that are coming, you know, they've been stuff people have been talking about since beta. There's some stuff in this response that actually worries me a little bit. So first off, he says absolutely, which that's not one of the things. We can always do better at listening to feedback. Of course, that's true, and something that we're all hoping for. We can also do better at communicating that we've heard feedback but aren't necessarily acting on it for whatever reason, or taking it under advisement and keeping an eye on it. I actually disagree with this part pretty heavily. I think that they do a pretty good, already they do enough of this work of making like a PR or lawyerly response about why they aren't changing conduit energy, why they aren't changing the Covenant system, why there wasn't ever actually the ripcord, why Covenants are the core part of the game the expansion's built on and they just can't change it, and all those things. You know, they've made multiple posts to those effects. They made multiple posts about why essences couldn't be account-wide and all those sorts of things. And, you know, maybe not everybody ends up seeing those posts because they're stupid and people don't, well, I don't know, like not the people are stupid, but the posts are stupid and they don't get shared around as much as when Blizzard makes, you know, good changes that actually people want to talk about a lot. But they definitely do make these posts. And so to the extent to which they are looking to increase their ability to communicate why they aren't responding to feedback, I actually don't think that's something they really need to, I don't think they need to get better at that at all. In fact, I wish they were worse at that so they couldn't do it nearly as often. So anyways, in some areas we were wrong. Community said conduit energy is going to be frustrating. Our intent was bad and we're dumb, but we heard that from them and should have changed our minds there sooner. Yeah, they should have. And then in the other area, this is about the Covenant swap. They're saying stuff about how what we hear from more than just folks who are content creators, that's me, high-end raiders, that's also me, PvPers, that's me whenever there's items I need from PvP, but only then. We know who have a specific playstyle. One of the challenges in designing WoW is there's a dozen different playstyles. Many of them are not as vocally or prominently represented. So they have to be very careful listening too much to people like me, because changes that would make the game perfect for me would make it a lot worse for a lot of those people. I understand that. I agree with that. I think that that is very much true, that they shouldn't just do only changes to make the game good for content creators and high-end raiders at the expense of everybody else. In fact, it's everybody else that makes the game possible for it to exist. So I'm always interested in a balance. I'm always interested in taking sacrifices for the game, how the game works for me, if it brings meaningful, good effects for those other players. The problem is the Covenant system, I feel like the feedback was given not just from the high-end community, but was in fact pretty vocal across the spectrum, that it was going to be a negative impact for a lot of casual players. In fact, a lot of people who put themselves somewhere along that casual spectrum, people who really like RPG choices, that sort of stuff, a lot of those people, and you know, if they're playing Warlocks, they were still playing Night Fae this expansion, right? Like that's, they ended up not only not getting a core RPG choice, they ended up seeing that there was something that was RPG choice like, and then they were forced to pick a character power level thing that went against what they wanted to do for their RPG choice because of the fact that Blizzard completely ignored their feedback. And I feel like here, this paragraph is trying to defend like, oh, hey, you know, we did the Covenant thing because the high-end players wanted it to be different and the casuals wanted it to be this way. And, oh, actually the casuals changed their mind later But I don't think that's the case. I think that the most people were pretty, you know, they were either neutral on it. There were certainly some people that in favor of it, but at least among the more casual creators that I follow, which admittedly is not too many of them, but I do like to keep abreast with what everybody else thinks, particularly about these sorts of core systems. And I did quite a lot of work to try and educate myself on the arguments in favor of the Covenant system, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just arguing for something that would be good for me but bad for other people, right? Like stuff like the Master Looter system. You don't hear me saying just bring back Master Looter the way it used to be. You'll maybe hear me proposing some ways to improve the loot system, but always cognizant of maintaining the benefits that the personal loot system now has versus the way Master Looter used to work for the casual players, for people in AOTC guilds, for people that are pugging, right? I always try really hard to be aware of that, and I don't think the Covenant system was one of those things. I don't think that was the case. In fact, I think that if you just look at the stats of people who chose Covenants, I mean, if you look at the stats of the Covenants that Warlocks are, I feel like it just completely shatters the idea that there's a majority of people that are out there about a core RPG choice, because I don't believe that Night Fae is the one that most people's Warlocks thematically fit with, and yet it's something. Actually, let me go look it up. Okay, yeah, here's what I could find for Warlock Covenant stuff. It's a little bit outdated now, but it's showing the story from the start of the expansion, which, in fact, I think is even better for this. So you can see, even at the start of the expansion, more than half of the players who leveled up and picked their Covenant as Affliction Warlocks picked Fae. For demo, it was basically tied between Fae and Necrolord. At the time, people thought Necrolord was actually going to be a really good choice for demo as well. Turned out to mostly be Fae. And Destro, actually a huge amount picking Kyrian at the start of the expansion as well. But pretty good balance across the board. But pretty quick, you're seeing everybody creeping up towards the Fae, right? Every single spec of Warlock, up to 80% for Athlock, but we're approaching majorities for both Demo and Destro as well. By the time we get to March 15th, less than 4 months into the expansion, that became true. And then we have an update from April, and in April you can see it's also trending even further upwards, just every day more people swapping to Night Fae. You know, how many of those people are doing it based on updating a core RPG choice or something like that, versus how many people are having what could be an RPG choice if the system wasn't tied to power level being ripped away from them because the game also has elements they want to do, like even heroic raiding, where they don't want to do 1,000 less DPS than other people. My argument was from the start, and I think it was a good argument, that it was mostly the latter, and that affected way more than just these 1%ers, right? This is not 1%ers. This is this is 80%ers now of Athlocks, right? That are, I think, in this place. And so I'm worried about this paragraph because I feel like they're learning the wrong lesson here. And I don't want to come across as somebody who's like, yeah, they should have seen that they should have made the game good for me and bad for other people. I think that this is a case of like, they should have made the game better for everybody from the start. And they hopefully are able to hear the feedback that way in future. But I am worried that this suggests a different thing about what lessons they're learning from the way that those systems were implemented. A lot of what goes into 9.1.5 isn't a one-off, a reflection of changing the underlying philosophies. To the extent to which that's true, I'm pretty wholeheartedly in support of it. They've motivated our approach to designing, outgrowths of lessons taught to us by our predecessors. So this paragraph is basically saying we learned a lot of lessons that were true when we were designing vanilla, right? That were true in TBC and that aren't true anymore. Not because the game is necessarily different so much as the way that people play the game has evolved, right? And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think you can see evidence of that when you look at just how different WoW Classic is from WoW Vanilla in terms of like, oh, mage boost leveling by AoE pulling dungeons. That was very niche, very rare thing to see back in Vanilla the first time. And now it's a much more prevalent thing in WoW Classic, right? So I think that is a good thing, you know, no longer being attached to things and using the fact that they were correct and you thought about them 15 years ago and decided they were correct in a good way, right? You made a good decision 15 years ago about them, not relying on that same decision going forward. I think that's going to be really good. Cross-faction rating, something that I think really, cross-faction PvE in general, given that we basically have cross-faction PvP in the lore, or you can just queue up for Twin Peaks and show up in a human mask and be playing on Alliance side or whatever. But some reason we can't do PvE as or with the other faction. So 9.1.5 reflects a shift towards more alt accessibility, more catch-up, more sensitivity and respect for players' time. I'm a big celebrator of this as well. I think that when World of Warcraft patches first launch, they actually work usually pretty well for the first month or two. I think Korthia was a uniquely unfriendly to players' time in just how dull the grind was and how much it was just running around looking for stars on your minimap and stuff. But I think in general, I'm usually pretty down for doing some grind, upgrading my character's power level at the start of a patch. But the way that it always ends up being 4 months down the line and the system is exactly the same, and you're just looking at playing an alt and you're like, you look at the playing an alt and you see this checklist of like 7 things you're going to have to do, one of which is going to be fun and 6 of which are going to be a slog. And you're just like, I'm not actually going to do this. I think that it would be really good if they started systematically anticipating that and designing the systems to automatically bring alt accessibility a month or 2 into the patch, because I think that's a good time for it. I think if you look at these systems, Torghast, it makes sense to do these runs over the first couple weeks of the patch and upgrade your gear from 235 to 249 to 262. That incremental power level, it makes a lot of sense at the start of a patch. But for alt, systems like that just end up feeling restrictive. And so I think that rather than relying on a 0.1.5 patch always to come out and solve the problem in some manual way, they should just automatically come up with an idea for like, okay, here's how this time gate's going to work, and here's how it will be eased up in a month or 2 or 3 from when the patch starts. I'd be really interested in seeing something like that. This paragraph doesn't say they're going to do that, but I feel like it would be a really good way to accomplish these objectives. Okay, then cross-faction rating, bit more on the radar. One of those things where a lot of things to solve, a lot of things to figure out. If Jaina and Thrall are working alongside each other, why can't Alliance and Horde players, particularly keep a high-end Alliance guild together in NA or Horde 1 in Oceania? These are basically the talking points of the people arguing for cross-faction PvE. So hopefully this is an indicator that they are on that team now as well, and they are working on that, and this is them starting to lay the groundwork, starting to make the argument to the people who are against it that will help explain when they do it, why they do it. That's maybe a little bit optimistic, but if there's one thing that could come soon that would make me believe that they are dropping some of that stubbornness, that long-held stubbornness, it would be this. I mean, not just wouldn't just be easing up on expansion level stubbornness, right? This has been something they've been stubborn on for many years now, so it would be a good sign if this were to change. And hopefully this language makes me think that they want to do that, because I don't think he'd be saying this stuff if it wasn't something they were at least seriously thinking about or planning on doing, right? I think he would instead be giving the answer about how the faction conflict is at the heart of World of Warcraft and yada yada. That's the thing that's always been true about the game and blah blah. Dumb PR answer that they give all the time to go back to this point about how we can do better about communicating, we've heard, but aren't acting on it for whatever reason. I heard that 10 times from them about that from the cross-faction PvE side. Okay, talked about 9.2. Should we expect a 9.2.5, 9.3? We'll be talking more about the conclusion to Shadowlands in more detail in the future. Yes, 9.2. More planned after that. Hard to say too much without spoiling the story. We'll explain it in the full context of what 9.2 is going to be. This seems like not what they would say if there was going to be a 9.3. So again, if you think about the world where there is a 9.3, I don't know. I think they'd be willing to say it. I think they'd be willing to say, yes, we're planning a 9.2. We're planning multiple more content patches for Shadowlands. We're really excited for where the story is going to go. I think that's not what's happening, though. I just don't think there's enough time in the calendar for a 9.3 anymore. If you think about 9.2 as coming out in like February, which I think would be a pretty early estimate, maybe a hopeful one, maybe a good time for it to come out, but I don't think it can come out much earlier than February at this point. There's just really not that much time until we're at that August, July, September window where they usually drop the new expansion. So I don't know where you could fit a 9.3 in there. Maybe you can, but I'm starting to think it's not coming, which I'd be down for. If 10.0, starts to really implement these things, if that's where we get cross faction, if that's where we get all these sorts of changes, if that's where we start to see this paradigm shift making its way into the game, then I'd be pretty excited about that. Although there's also not much time for a 10.0 beta to get started before I'd be worried about there not being enough time of beta testing. So I don't know, a rock and a hard place here. Okay. Next question basically is talking about whether the setting is going to go back to being adventurers or whether we're going to go and fight even bigger gods and stuff. And he's basically saying he thinks WoW can do both and he wants it to alternate, which fine by me. I think the game has been good in cosmic expansions. I think Legion, with you go and fight a planet and then the bad guy sticks a sword into a planet, pretty cosmic stuff going on there. I think that story was pretty compelling, though. It did also have roots in the original Warcraft story, though, with Illidan's thing. So I do think being tied to Azeroth is something that would be good for the WoW story. But at the end of the day, story is actually, I like story quite a bit. I feel like a lot of times people assume that you can only really fit in one of these boxes, right? You can only be a content creator, a high-end raider, a PvPer, or somebody who likes RPG choices and somebody who enjoys the setting. But I dispute that. I think that it's possible to be in multiple of those different boxes, and I would count myself as in there. I feel like I know the WoW lore quite well. I've followed it for a long time, played this game for a long time, played the RTSs before it, so I've read the books, some of them. So I like this stuff, and I don't really have too much of an opinion about whether we should go back to being adventurers or whether we should do another god-slaying adventure. I'm down for either of those. I think the story can be good or bad in either of those cases, so that's more of what I care about. Legion time walking. Man, I gotta say, I'm just not, the way that time walking is working right now, I'm just not a huge believer. Maybe Legion time walking is going to change my mind, but it's hard for me to imagine how a 1 week long event that comes out every 4 weeks or 4 months is really going to fundamentally enhance the gameplay at a core level for me. So for me, I'm somebody who likes to play this game a lot. And so any content that's that, like you think about M plus seasons where there's only been one push week and 11 dead weeks have been really bad seasons, right? That's kind of BFA season 3 was sort of like that. You had it was the enchanted weeks were the only weeks you could play, the enchanted fortified weeks, which were 2 out of 12, and that was pretty bad. Legion time walking is like having 1 week you can play it and then 15 where it's not active, something like that. So there's a very limited amount of value that I draw from the way that time walking works right now, where it's on this sort of cyclical basis. I'd much rather see them do this retooling of old content, refurbishing, and then actually just bring it back into the entire game for an expansion or a season, which is what I've advocated before, but I recognize that they're probably not going to do that. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's that big a deal. I do think that if they did it that way, it could help make up for an expansion where they don't come up with very many dungeons, like Shadowlands, where there's only 8 of them. But they could also fix that by just making more dungeons. So either of those things would work for me. And then should they make a WoW 2? Now we're fine. That's basically the TLDR of this one. So WoW 1 is just fine. The game does not need a reboot. Then they're also introducing this community council, which is going to be about, you can sign up for this now if you want. Click this little thing and see if you can get invited. I encourage you to do this if you are somebody who wants to, engage with the developers. But I will say that I'm somewhat skeptical of this. So anybody can join this or anybody can sign up to join. When you join, you can post in this forum. Everybody can see the forum, but only the people who got accepted can actually post in it. So a smallish group of people that can actually talk there, but then everybody sees what Blizzard and they say. Plus a private discussion and live chats. So pretty cool to the extent to which this is them looking to not make the Conduit Energy mistake and the Covenant mistake again. I'm in favor of it. To the extent that this is them looking to do a better job of communicating that they've heard and aren't acting on feedback or taking it under advisement and keeping an eye on it, I'm not particularly stoked about it. Because again, as I said, I already think that I already don't have a problem with understanding Blizzard's reasons for doing dumb mistakes about the game design, and I don't need a better place to hear them do that. I need a place where they actually don't make conduit energy next time. So if that's what this is, poggers. But if not, then, you know, whatever. Anyways, that's my take on these things. I would say skeptical. It's at this point, it's going to be impossible for blue posts and interviews to really change my expectations too much for the game. Obviously, you know, I think these are good things that they're talking about doing here, but we saw similar promises of good things going into Shadowlands beta, where they then trampled on all the feedback and did all the dumb stuff anyways. So if that happens again, you know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? So I'm trying to not get fooled again here. But if this actually is legitimate and they're not just going to make this effort for a short time and this represents a serious philosophy change here, then that's great. But for me, the way that I will believe that's happening is when the next time they introduce an idea like conduit energy in beta, it doesn't actually make it to the live servers, right? The next time they introduce a system like corruption that players foresee all these acquisition problems with, it doesn't make it to live without a vendor, right? If we start seeing those things happening, if we start seeing them giving ground on stuff like cross-faction PvE, then I'll be willing to believe that this is going to be doing good stuff for the game. But for now, I don't think it's a good idea to expect that, right? I think that when somebody promises something, you should expect they'll do it. But then when somebody promises something and doesn't do it, you should no longer expect them to do stuff they promise. So that's the state I'm at with these sorts of posts from Blizzard. And if I see that that's changed, I'll be very happy about it. I will sing the praises of this. But until then, I can't really update my opinions based off of more words, right? So that's where we're at. Hope you liked the video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.